I was going to say later. Was there ever any ceiling being held up or walls being built whilst you were holding the ceiling up in Afghanistan?
Yes, I'll take Joyce. I think you will.
Yes. Previous wars against Afghanistan have never succeeded in creating a unified government or any stability. What do we expect would be the outcome if we withdrew next year or if we stayed on another 15 years? Would it be any different?
Thank you. And Julia?
I was just going to ask how long.
Okay. But meaning, how long does each person think we should stay?
Well, no, really, how long does the army go holding up the walls and hoping that something will change in Afghanistan?
Okay.
Just how
I'll
long?
note you, Mark, but I'll just take those
is rather
three,
like
and I don't know, shall you go first?
I don't mind.
Jane, was there ever a ceiling in Afghanistan? There was very briefly at the beginning, before the Taliban got itself reorganised from Pakistan and came back out again, when, if, and it was a big if, we could have got the two principal sides who fought the Russians to agree in an Afghan style what should happen. It was a very, very brief window and we didn't get through it. The principal architect on the Afghan side was a very, very astute former warlord who did become the foreign minister for the Afghan government and then resigned, and actually you probably know the guy. He then stood for election as the president and lost out to the present one. He was perhaps the one person through a combination of personal integrity and military muscle who could have done that. Once he'd gone, there was very little chance. And the problem is, of course, that you've already put your people in. There is a natural suction effect. The problem was we didn't go in to hold the roof up. According to that rather strange little ginger chap, we went in to hold a roof up that was already there. With a bit of luck, we'll pull our troops out without ever firing a shot. That was the most arrogant and arrogant nonsense. And of course, having gone in with so few people, we got smacked very hard. And once you've lost your reputation, it takes a long time to get it back. And there was no central infrastructure. So the ceiling was briefly there, but it was maybe a porticabin ceiling and we lost it. Joyce, previous wars, yeah, I mean, they have them all the time. The conference I was just speaking at was First Afghan War, Second Afghan War,
Yes.
and are we now in the third one? The only difference perhaps with the third one is we do not want to permanently have a force in Afghanistan, but we do want a government. We
don't, but do the Americans, as they have?
I don't think they do, no. The Americans are like a schizophrenic elephant. They have tremendous power for good. They're not actually as nasty as people think. They're just naive, who think everybody should love them because, you know, they want to be nice. And I'm discounting the business interest, which was a factor in all these wars, and I wouldn't deny that. But I think the pipe dream, and I would say it is a pipe dream in the foreseeable future, is to have a stable government in Afghanistan, which Pakistan will go along with, and which China will go along with, because they're the key players in the area, and that we want to get out of it. We were only clever enough in the second Afghanistan war to get out before the roof fell in again. I doubt we will be clever enough this time. Lastly, how long? Well, that's for the government to decide. We can keep losing soldiers, we can keep retaking the same valley, we can keep training up the Afghan forces. But of course, who are we training up? I was amused to see, and I mean that in a very mordant way, I was amused to see that in the interlude between the first and second Afghan wars, there were a lot of complaints from the British who were in Afghanistan that teenage mess boys would suddenly come into the officers' mess, produce a dagger and try to stab somebody, that cooks would poison the food, and of course you all know about the Cavagnari assassination of our embassy there and all the rest of it. The fact is that there's no sign at the moment that they're going to get along with each other. It's how they do things. I organised a conference in the Foreign Office to do with the poppy harvest and what we should do about it. There were people from 40 countries came to that conference, and at the end of it, the only solution was, well, why don't we actually just teach them how to grow wheat? There wasn't anybody at that conference who was able to tell them that at that altitude you can't grow really wheat. And you certainly can't sell it to Pakistani drug lords for what they're selling opium for. So I come back to it, ignorance and arrogance of the West.
Yes.
And how long are we in there? Well, either until it works or till we realise that actually we're only another brief interlude in an eternal struggle by Afghan tribes.
Exactly.
Which may be the case.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Lindsay, would you like to...
Yes, I mean, you see, I don't think you can really approach it just simply from the point of view that this is Afghans who are different tribes and don't get on with each other. I mean, there obviously are big tribal and national divisions inside Afghanistan, but actually, if you look at the present phase of the war, in which I would include the Soviet invasion and the whole last 30 years, really, actually what you're talking about is the role of empires going into an area like this. Firstly, the Soviets did a massive military machine, which they went in and, created a huge opposition to them. The opposition was very much aided by the United States. I mean, we shouldn't regard this as somehow they're just, kind of impartial, friendly observers. They funded, among others, Bin Laden. They funded the Mujahideen because they wanted to defeat the Soviets. This was the kind of mindset of the Cold War, and that was what was still going on there. So I don't think you can look at it as just like this. In 2001, when the present Afghan war started, effectively the West intervened on one side in the civil war which had been going on, right? It intervened on the side of the Northern Alliance, and who were equally, whatever criticisms people might have of the Taliban, there are equal criticisms of the Northern Alliance in terms of treatment of women, in terms of brutality, in terms of any of these sorts of things. Nobody really gave a damn about that, because this is what all these wars effectively end up as being about regime change. They're all put in terms of humanitarian intervention, but they all end up effectively as regime change. They got rid of the Taliban, big deal. That was an easy thing to do when you're the American military machine. It's not a difficult. The Taliban didn't have an air force, didn't have any of these sorts of things. But actually, in effect, a group of people were put into government, led by Karzai, who is actually an American placeman who was put in there, just as they did in Iraq. And, I don't think you can look at the wars without looking at this background to it, because you have to say it isn't just simply you start from here in terms of looking at a solution. And therefore, the role of imperialism, the role of the Americans in particular, but also the British, who of course have as David has said, have a much longer historic role. And it's not an accident that when they attacked the British Council, this is on Independence Day, it's a political statement by the Taliban that they don't like the British, and they fought the British nearly 100 years ago for the right to control their own foreign policy. So I think you have to look at it like this, and I think when we talk about can it succeed if the troops withdraw, my attitude is simply this: it can't succeed while the troops are there. I think that's the way we should put the question. Of course, the country is a mess. It is one of the poorest countries in the world. It has a completely corrupt political government. One of the things that I do agree, at least in part with David on, is that actually I don't think the role of the NGOs is necessarily particularly positive in these situations, that they can become centres of corruption, and even when they're not centres of corruption, it's a kind of benevolent form of the West intervening. The example of the crops and so on is a good example. I guess the Afghans know what crops they can grow in their own country. I guess it's something they probably know better than we know. So maybe they should be allowed to make this decision for themselves without having a massive bureaucracy that goes over to Kabul to tell them how to do these kind of things. So I think we have to understand whatever the solution, it cannot lie with the West. Now, of course, it can lie with some of the regional countries, you know, but of course already this has been quite a poisonous situation. The situation in Pakistan is a very dangerous situation politically and militarily. India is intervening in Afghanistan, and of course is a nuclear, well, as in Pakistan, there's two nuclear states right next to it who are very much rivals in terms of their government, and you have a very serious problem there. But it seems to me it's only the people of Afghanistan and the region who can decide. The problem here is Iran then will play a big role, and you know, this terrifies the West, having got rid of Saddam Hussein. Iran is now the biggest player in the Middle East, and they don't like that. So these are all questions. How long will it go on? My belief is that it will never, I don't actually agree with David that the counterinsurgency is going to work. I don't believe it will be like Ireland in that sense. And I mean, Ireland has a lot more going for it in terms of political infrastructure and actually the nature of the politics of the provisional IRA, whatever you might or might not think of them, and Sinn Féin, actually much more sophisticated politics. And so I don't think that is going to work. I think how long very much depends on two things. One is the economic cost. Britain certainly cannot afford the level of army and the level of wars that it is involved in. It's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous that, you know, if you look at every statistic in Britain, well, there's a report today saying Britain's about the worst place in the world to live, and not just the weather, you know, absolutely everything about it, from sunshine, I know that's been an exception in the last few days, but, you know, everything, wages and all sorts of things, it's a very, very bad place. So it's very low in terms of the general well-being of the citizens in this country, but very high with arms and involvement in wars and so. But America can't afford these wars. A quarter of America's deficit is money that they have borrowed to pay for the wars over. Now,
A lot of it from China.
yeah, and China is America's banker. Simple as that. And so, you know, this is a big problem economically. The second big problem is political. That the majority of people in all these countries oppose the wars, including in Afghanistan, actually, as far as you can do decent surveys. Now, it seems to me then that the question for us is how do we raise this as a political issue? That's a big problem in Britain. It's the background of this war. There was a guy killed the other week, a soldier was killed in Britain by live ammunition while he was training to go to Afghanistan. That got, in The Guardian, I don't know about other papers, it got 3 times as much coverage as an actual guy who's been killed the same day in Afghanistan has got about that much. I mean, that's the reality. We have to try to change that. It's very important what happened to the TUC a couple of weeks ago. Look, for the first time in 10 years, the TUC has come out against the war in Afghanistan. We should use that absolutely everywhere in all trade unions. They also